Welcome back to Beelzebub the Jag. I'm about 75 or 80 miles into another one of these 200-mile journeys I do every couple of days. I'm heading this time from Brighton back to Nottingham. And as you know, as I've become used to, the car is just faultless. It's truly staggering, really, that something of this age can perform like this. It just goes to show you, that how well they were built. Well, it's not so much that they were well built. We all know that Jaguar had build sort of quality issues, but the design and the sort of development was correct. They did have in the sort of 70s and the 80s. I think it was probably over and done with by the time this car came about. The control, the quality control issues, I'm pretty sure, have been dealt with. But nonetheless, whether they're put together properly or not, they're just a majestic and wonderful thing. They're just so well designed. It's very difficult to describe. And the appeal and the desire for these cars has never gone away. I've adored them since early childhood, in the sort of early 1970s, since I was a young child. And since the age of 19, I've driven these cars. And to be fair, most of the ones I've had have been absolute shite, real heaps. But I've loved them in their own way anyway. But, I've sort of probably bought them for £400, going back years when they were £400 bangers, and just driven it until it fell apart, and then bought another one for £400 or £500. But of course, they're no longer in that territory. They're very desirable classics, and they're priced accordingly now. But this is basically the same car. I'm driving in my 50s to what I used to drive in my late teens and early 20s. So the desire's never gone away. And if you've never driven one, it's difficult to. It's kind of difficult to sort of understand what it is about them. But if you've been fortunate enough to travel in one, you'll fully understand. And the bug never goes away. And I've made the mistake that many people make, and I've got a couple of friends that have currently drowning in numbers at the moment. I've made the mistake of simply buying too many cars because they're available, and you've sort of, the desire gets the better of you, and you end up with 5 or 6 cars that have all got problems, and you can't possibly repair and maintain 5 cars that are in bad way. If you get one and you get it right, and where I'm hoping obviously to eventually in the next year or so to have gone through everything on this car, absolutely everything, and leave nothing to chance. And I dare say I would be tempted by another one. Well, I know I'll be tempted. I'm always tempted, but I sort of hold off. I won't be so silly again as to buy another car, whatever bargain it is, whilst I've still got a lot to do on this one. But the day will come when this one's completely done, and all I've got to do is this sort of routine upkeep. There'll be no more restoration, there'll be no more heavy work on my back in the street. It'll just be routine. And and at that point I'll almost definitely get tempted. And there's a long list of things that could tempt me, and none of which would be terribly expensive. I get less enjoyment out of paying a huge amount of money and putting myself and my family under financial pressure. That doesn't, and I'd struggle to enjoy such a car. But to sort of hunt for something that's an absolute bargain. The best ones are, I don't know, let's say for instance I decide on the model after this, maybe an XK8, late 90s, and it's a sort of 25 plus year old car right now. A lot of those were sort of bought new by people buying themselves a retirement present, and then they sort of enjoyed the car and nurtured it and cherished it and just looked after it. And obviously all these years later, those people are way too old to drive now, or time's really passed and they've passed away. And you quite often find that such a car, it stays in sort of the family keep the car for a while because they're not really sure what to do with it. And perhaps they're reasonably well heeled. They don't need the financial sort of push of selling the car. So they sort of sit there, and after a couple of years, the battery's gone flat, and the tyres have gone flat, and then they might decide to sell it. Now, such a car, if it were well cherished, really, really cherished, and had a full service history up until the point that the owner either passed away or got too old to drive it, you can be pretty sure that there won't be a lot of, obviously it will need recommissioning and it won't have an MOT, but if it was perfect when it went into a garage and was there's, after 2 or 3 years, the chance of anything significant going wrong, but it's very slim. Of course you're buying a car that would need recommissioning, but you're buying a non-runner basically without an MOT, so the price would reflect that. You really wouldn't pay very much, and without a huge expenditure, it'd be quite a lot of work. Without a huge expenditure, you would end up with an absolutely wonderful, wonderful car. And that's the sort of thing I could be extremely tempted by. An early XJ8. Totally different to this, looks like this, but obviously it got a later V8 engine, which in itself is a truly wonderful engine. A lot of people think it's an American engine, but it's not. It's a Jaguar designed and built engine. It's not in the traditional sense of a straight six or a V12. It does break away from tradition, but the car still looks very traditionally Jaguar, and they still drive in the very traditional Jaguar sense. So it's a car, I think, as long as I didn't pay too much money for it, I could really, really enjoy. And that's the way I would go about it. I'd be looking for something that the family was selling on behalf of an aged or sadly deceased relative, and probably buy something out at MOT and do the work. Another one that would be very, very tempting would be another XJ6, but a later XJ6. I've already had one, an X300, from about 96, 97, 98, something like that. But it would have to be a 5-speed manual. I wouldn't have another XJ6 automatic, because it's simply too much like this car. I've already got an XJ6 automatic. So I could be very tempted by a manual, a 4-speed, the 5-speed manual, 4 litre or 3.2, that would be particularly wonderful. There is the slim possibility of an XJS 3.6 5-speed manual. Same circumstances. It would have to be sort of perhaps been stood for a couple of years, no MOT, but up until the point it was stood, be really, really, really well looked after. So you would, hopefully you're just looking at a recommissioning and a sympathetic, going through everything like I'm doing with this car, not a restoration. Another one which has always sort of agonised me is the 2.5 litre, the Daimler 2.5. It's basically a Mark II Jaguar, but with a Daimler 2.5 engine. Now they are still astonishing bargains. You can get one that's, they don't need to be MOT'd anymore, but something that's MOT standard and that's basically running and everything's there, you can get them for really not a lot of money. But ultimately, it's such an old car, it would turn out to be a full restoration. But it'd be a running restoration, it wouldn't be a standing restoration where everything's seized. So I don't know. It's constantly on my mind. It's ridiculous. I should know better. And this is the only car I have, and it puts a lot of pressure on the car, as a daily driver, and if anything goes wrong or it needs work, it puts a lot of pressure on me, even if it's -5 and thick ice on the ground like it was in January. If you saw the films of me working in the snow and the ice, I have to sort of tolerate those conditions. I simply don't have another car, so for that reason it would be nice to have a backup. It would take the mileage down by half on this car. And, I'm making excuses, aren't I? I don't need to make excuses. We all know that the chances are I will probably, when the time's right, I will almost definitely buy another Jaguar. And those that I mentioned, will be very high on the list. As would a V12. It would more likely to be a 6-litre late generation V12. The 5.3 litre V12s are extremely pricey now, and I would say probably beyond what I'd be prepared to pay, unless I just got lucky. If I were sort of, if it were in that non-runner category that it was non-running because of a flat battery and the MOT had gone, that sort of thing, because it had been stood for a couple of years, not because it had been left around in a barn for 20 years. Yeah, that would be a possibility. Any V12 is just majestic, but we'll see. But what I can absolutely categorically promise I won't do, I will not buy another car until this one is 100% finished and there's no more expenditure to be done. Because immediately what would happen, I'd be spending money on the new acquisition, and this one would then start to get neglected. The things that I'd always planned to do wouldn't get done, and it would just be impossible. So this one's got to be 100% finished before I can even entertain the idea of something else. And then it's got to come along really at the right price, and possibly a half or a third of what can be considered to the normal sort of market value with an MOT serviced and running. You know, if I'm buying something that's not running because of a flat battery, flat tyres, not been MOT for a couple of years, you don't pay sort of top price for that. It's you do pay at least 50% discount on the normal price, and that brings them within viability. You know, this one didn't have an MOT when I bought it. I bought it under I'd seen it for a year and I couldn't afford it, and my other car was fine, and the other car broke, then I still couldn't afford this car. But you know, under lockdown, you know, this car was still available. That was a year ago in the first lockdown, and you know, by the end of the lockdown, you know, the MOT had failed and all this sort of thing, and it was running, but it had no MOT. So, you know, I paid an according price, and if you've seen the films, you'll know that I've really gone through this car and that there's still a long way to go. But we'll get there, and it'll be a similar acquisition to this. Something extremely sound and solid, basically with the service history, but would obviously need quite a bit of work, you know, sympathetic cosmetic work and just sort of recommissioning work. Nothing major, no massive rebuilds, and you know, engine rebuilds, gearbox rebuilds, that sort of, to hell with that. So we'll see. We'll just see. You know, it's pure fantasy at the moment because I've still got so far to go with this one, but you know, it pains me really, because I ought to be satisfied with what I've got, and I'm extremely satisfied with it, but it's having that ridiculous itch. It's a bit like being an alcoholic. You know, you can't leave it alone. It's a bit sad, I suppose, but we all have our cross to bear. You know, I'm not a drinker, I'm not a smoker, I'm not a drug taker or a gambler, but you know, these things, I'm afraid, and those of you that know me very well will know that I'm ridiculous with bespoke shoes, and that's a totally different story. But yeah, as I say, we all have our ridiculous notions and our ridiculous behaviours.